Okay, let's just jump right in. We hear about national debt all the time, but what if I told you it's not a flaw in the system? What if it is the system?
Just look at that number. That is the total amount of debt on planet Earth. $315 trillion. To put that in perspective, it's 3 times the size of the entire global economy. Every single country is in debt. The United States, Japan, China, you name it, they owe.
And that leads to this bizarre, kind of terrifying paradox. If everyone owes money, who exactly is getting paid? Who's the creditor? The answer isn't some shady guy in a volcano lair or another planet. The world owes the money to itself.
And here's the core idea we're going to unpack today. This wasn't an accident. This perspective argues it was all designed this way, step by 4 key figures over 3 centuries. They built a system where debt can never really be paid off. And once you see the blueprint, you'll get it. That massive number isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system, working exactly as intended.
So let's go back, way back to the 17th century, where the first architect laid the foundation for this whole inescapable trap.
See, before 1694, if a king needed cash, he'd borrow it, and then he'd either pay it back or, just decide not to. It was super risky for lenders, but the debt was always temporary. Then this Scottish merchant, William Patterson, comes along and flips the entire table. He pitches a new model where the main loan, the principal, is never repaid, only the interest. And that interest? Oh, it was guaranteed by the government's power to tax its people. Forever.
His model was just revolutionary in its simplicity. The King of England needed money for a war, so he went for it. Wealthy merchants handed over their gold to the brand new Bank of England. In return, the government promised to pay them interest on that loan for all time, funded by your great, you get it, taxes. And here's the masterstroke. The government's IOU, its debt, actually became the basis for new paper money. Money was literally being created out of debt.
And bam, that was the big shift. All of a sudden, debt wasn't a problem you had to solve. It became a permanent feature, the very engine of this new financial system. For the bankers, it was a dream come true, a guaranteed paycheck for as long as the government existed.
So Patterson set the trap. But in the 1800s, our second architect, Nathan Rothschild, he's the one who made it global. He didn't just play the game, he industrialized it, scaling it up across all of Europe.
Rothschild's genius was in how he did it. First, instead of just lending his own money, he'd buy up government bonds and then resell them to a whole network of other investors. He created a secondary market. Second, he had his own private courier network that was faster than the government's. He famously used it to get news of the Battle of Waterloo first and make a killing on the market. But the most important thing he did was sell these bonds across borders, weaving this incredibly complex international web of debt.
And this had a huge consequence. Before Rothschild, if a king defaulted, his lenders were out of luck. But that was it. After Rothschild, a British bond might be owned by a French investor and used as collateral by a German bank. A default by one country could now start a domino effect, taking down the entire international system. Governments were completely trapped. They had to keep borrowing just to pay the interest.
Okay, let's jump forward to the 20th century, because this is where it gets even crazier. The trap was set. It was all interconnected, but it still needed one more thing, an unlimited source of fuel. This is where our next 2 architects come into play. By the early 1900s, America was an absolute powerhouse, but its financial system was basically the Wild West. After the Panic of 1907, where the powerful banker J.P. Morgan had to personally organize a bailout, he knew a more permanent solution was needed to protect the banking industry and his own empire.
And that solution was a central bank. Let's be really clear about what that is. A central bank has a unique, almost godlike power. It can create new money out of absolutely nothing, specifically to buy government debt.
So in a secret meeting on a place called Jekyll Island, Morgan and some other top bankers literally designed what would become the Federal Reserve. It was a work of political genius. It looked like a public system, but it was controlled by private banks. Its core job? To create unlimited demand for government bonds. If the government needed to borrow, the Fed could just fire up the printing presses. The trap now had an infinite source of cash.
So fast forward to the 1970s. The system is starting to strain, especially in developing nations that had borrowed a ton of money. The trap was global, but it wasn't totally inescapable for everyone. Not yet. Our 4th and final architect, Fed Chairman Paul Volcker, was about to change that.
To crush the crazy inflation happening in the US, Volcker did the unthinkable. He hiked interest rates to an unprecedented 20%. Now, this worked for the US economy, but for developing countries, it was a death sentence. The interest payments on their loans suddenly shot through the roof, pushing them right to the edge of default.
And this is where Volcker's big idea locked the final piece of the trap into place. Instead of letting these countries default and letting the big banks take a hit, he organized bailouts through the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. But these weren't get-out-of-jail-free cards. The IMF would lend just enough money for these countries to keep paying the interest to the Western banks. And in exchange, they had to gut their public services and sell off their national assets. Their debt was never forgiven, just endlessly restructured. They were trapped. Forever.
So let's connect all the dots. We've got Patterson's permanent debt, Rothschild's interconnected web, Morgan's infinite money machine, and Volcker's global enforcer. How does that all translate to the system that we're living in right now?
Well, when you actually look at who holds a country's debt, like the U.S. national debt, it starts to make a weird kind of sense. A huge chunk is held by the public. That's your pension fund, your insurance company, other banks. The Fed holds a massive slice that it literally created itself. And the government even owes money to itself through programs like Social Security. It's all one big circular system.
And here's the actual flow of money. It's simpler than you think. Taxpayers, you and me, we send our money to the government. The government then takes a massive chunk of that. We're talking about $1 trillion a year in the U.S., and sends it right back out as interest payments to the bondholders. And who are the bondholders? Overwhelmingly, they're large financial institutions and the very wealthy. It's a continuous, structural transfer of wealth from working people to capital.
So why not just pay it all off? Here's the ultimate punchline of the whole system. Our money supply is based on government debt. If the U.S. actually paid off its debt, the dollars that were created to buy that debt would just vanish. The money supply would collapse, and it would trigger a depression that would make the 1930s look like a party. The system literally cannot function without the very debt it was designed to create.
So, is this a problem, or is it a business model? This brings us to the final, really critical way to reframe this whole thing. We're taught to see debt as a problem, as something that needs to be solved. But what if it isn't a problem at all?
Let's just recap the 4 pillars our architects built. Patterson made debt permanent. Rothschild made it interconnected, so you couldn't default. Morgan gave it an infinite fuel source with a central bank, and Volcker made the trap globally inescapable, even for countries that go broke. Each one solved a problem in a way that just happened to benefit the bankers and make the trap stronger.
Every dollar of government debt is an asset on someone else's balance sheet, earning them interest. It's not a crisis for the financial institutions that own it. It's a business model, and a really, really successful one. So the question I want to leave you with isn't how do we solve the debt crisis? The real question is, are we looking at a system that's broken, or are we looking at one that's working perfectly exactly as it was designed?